Hello everyone and welcome to another Q&A episodes where we answer your questions related to test automation. And today's question is from Breen and it's related to BDD. I'm going to read parts of the question here. So she says our team is just starting the BDD journey and we're writing user stories while also discussing feature files using Gherkin format. We are confused how much details we should mention in user stories about the features. Should we keep feature files separate and link the actual user story? Or how much detail should we add in the user story? Conversely, what goes into the user story and what adds into the feature file? Um, she gives some background on the project and then she says we are confused how much detail we should provide in the user story, or should we use some plugin that can link our feature files from Git to Jira user story, and shouldn't write feature files as part of the user story itself. So there are a few things I'd like to talk about in this related to this question. So first off, a little bit on requirements and my understanding on that. User stories are essentially something which we started to replace traditional requirement documents with, right? So before Agile, we used to have waterfall, and that had requirement documents. A standard document used was the IEEE 830 1998 version, which folks who have been in the industry for a while would know that they were, standard guidelines for what is a good requirement. It should be traceable, it should be unambiguous, testable, maintainable, it should be measurable and readable, all those attributes. So from waterfall, when we moved on to agile, so the corresponding document for requirement documents, or soft SRS as they were known, we have user stories for the most part. So user stories are different compared to how we used to write requirements. They have a more collaborative nature in them, and they are a little bit elaborative probably than the traditional requirement might have been. But there's still these guidelines which I just mentioned from the IEEE document do signify the different roles probably requirements should play, and probably some of the things a user story should be able to help you with. Now, um, what my understanding is, that, and what I've read from other thought leaders in the industry, is when we start with user stories, definitely just writing, this is the requirement that we need to test, or this is the story that the user is looking for. That's sometimes not enough to give the complete picture. There are a lot of different tangents again on this topic, and I'm not going to go into the different point of views people have in the community. But I would like to add here that there was a gap with just the user story. At times, it can be confusing, and requirements making them complete, you can imagine, is not an easy task, because as you add more information, it becomes clearer, but then it adds the maintainability problem, and so on and so forth. That's a whole separate debate. But nonetheless, user stories themselves did lack something which TDD and then BDD helped with, and that was explaining the user story itself. So user stories by themselves could have been characterized as a bit vague or inconsistent, probably in parts between them, because from some people's point of view, they might feel that this is not consistent. What the user story is talking about, parts of it are contradicting, but in reality, it's just probably sometimes a difference of understanding. So requirements are in back in the day, if I go back to that example, when I started off a while ago, we used to have, and I started off with a different industry. I worked in the safety critical industry for a while. So we used to have requirement documents, SRS, FRS, and from those we used to write requirement interpretation documents, because each line could be interpreted differently, even if you try to explain or draft the sentences well enough, and it's not always that you have the time to construct a sentence that's unambiguous. So you would need to have requirement interpretations, and from those interpretations we would write test scenario documents, and then from there we would write test cases. So that, you see, it's a long chain, but when you follow that path, then you have an idea that you are covering the requirement itself, and so all of this was basically just developing an understanding of the requirement of what the user wants and creating tests against them. User stories coupled with BDD is, to my understanding, that's what we are talking about over there as well. So essentially, the user story explains in a concise way what the requirement is, and the BDD part explains how this requirement is going to be implemented. So the user story is the what part, what is to be done, and how is to be done is in some case explained by the BDD. For instance, not as to how it's going to be implemented, rather once the implementation is done, how it's going to function. So that's why you have test scenarios against them, so which we call feature files. So that was a little gap I thought would be useful when answering this question. So BDD is not something which is supposed to replace a user story. Was the whole point in this discussion? It was BDD is augmenting your understanding of the story. So now we come to the part where how we have to implement this, which exactly the question is that what detail should we add in the user story, and what detail we should add in the feature files. So, and she has mentioned resources which she has studied, which is the infamous Cucumber book and some few others. So I get that she has a fair understanding of what cucumber or gherkin is all about. So I have to mention here that I am not speaking from an extensive experience in this area. I have worked with this, but not to a great extent. So this is my opinion for the most part, from my understanding that I've read elsewhere, and I've learned from the community, and my brief experience on this, but it's not extensive. So, but generally implementation. So the first part about what's to be in the user story and what's to be in the feature file. So the user story has to be the requirement itself as to what exactly the user is asking for. A great resource on understanding about agile and user stories and sprints is the Mountain Goat I think it's a Mountain Goat Software is the name, I suppose. Yes, Mountain Goat Software, and they have an awesome resource. Mike Cohen, I believe, is probably the author there, and he usually has great content around agile. What I've seen, I think that would be, it's very practical. So I'd recommend definitely checking him out. So that's on the user story. And so it would just, you don't need to add scenarios from your feature files to your user story, or add anything from your user story to your feature files. Both of them have their separate roles and different visibility, and they perform they're working as a different piece in the whole scenario. So they both are important and should not be mixed or tried to copied. Now, drawing the line as to what's where, the key you can use is the what part of the requirement is to be in the user story, and details related to how should be part of the feature file where you're explaining how the user is going to interact with. So if the user does this, given this, then give, the syntax. So if given this is what's happening, and then this is what you do, then this is the desired response. So given, when, then. So that should be the part of the feature file. Linking them, users, also another point on I missed about user stories, why they have their own places. User stories have a different visibility. User stories are more accessible, probably even outside of the outside of your organization. Feature files, they could be. It's not that they should not, but for the most part, they are as an internal document rather than something which is external. User stories could be something which you can share with your customers as well, right? So they have different visibility, and everyone might not be able to access your feature files as good or understand your feature files as good as a user story, even though Gherkin is pretty much, simple language. So that's why they have their own place. So about linking your feature files with your user stories, I'd recommend that feature files should be treated as source code for the most part, and you can track them using whatever source control you are using. And with Jira, for instance, the way we do it, so such files are part of our source control, and we relate each of these files to the specific Jira item or the user story. And you can have plugins. Jira supports all the famous source controls. So we have a plugin there which essentially, in the source control, when we enter in a new file, whenever we push something or commit something, and we add the user story number, the Jira ID with it, so it gets populated automatically under that specific user story in the separate tab. So you can access that file, that feature file, from there while it's being it's being managed by the source control. And even you don't have to view the feature file. You don't have to even leave Jira. You can just open the feature file from within Jira. The plugins support that, so you just click on the file and it will open in a separate tab, and you can just for viewing the file, you can have it in the same place. So essentially you would have your user story and your feature file in the same Jira item. So you don't have to hop between different software. And I think that should do the job. So you should have the what part in the user story in the Jira item description itself, and how part where you are explaining features, and how the implementation is going to be tested, or how it's going to be implemented, essentially, because that's what ability is, behavior driven development, right? So you develop according to what the end result you want. So the how part is being explained there, and you don't have to copy stuff here to there or from either side. They should be in this in their own place, and you can just have them both under the same Jira item. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, add them in the comments below, If you find this video useful, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to join us in redefining software quality. See you next time.